Why do we classify sins in the Catholic Church? Is sin not sin? Is there a scriptural reference to this classification of sin in the Catholic Church? My dear friends in Christ, one thing that we know is that sin is an evil human act which violates the rational nature of man as well as God's nature and his eternal law. St. Augustine of Hippo says that sin is a word, a deed, a desire in opposition to the law of God. It can come as a word, a spoken word. It can come as our deed, our daily actions, or even the desire that is not in line with the law of God. The letter of St. John, first letter of St. John, chapter 3, verse 4 says that sin is the breaking of the law. Every time we sin, we break the law of God. In the doctrines of the Catholic Church, we are taught that personal sins can either be mortal or venial sins. And then we ask, what is mortal sin? Mortal sins are sins of grave matters, sins of serious matters, where the sinner performs the act with full knowledge and deliberate consent. You can confer the Catechism of the Catholic Church, 1857. Mortal sin is a sin that destroys charity. That is, it destroys the grace of God in the heart of a Christian. It is in itself a rejection of God. And if mortal sin is left unattended to, it may lead to a separation from God, which is traditionally called damnation. And the second class of sin is what the church teaches as venial sins. And venial sins are sins which do not meet the conditions for mortal sins. The act of committing a venial sin does not cut the sinner off from God's grace, as the sinner has not rejected God. However, venial sins injure the relationship between God and the sinner, and as such, with venial sin, a sinner must seek reconciliation in God. Through the sacrament of reconciliation and through the sacrament of the Holy Eucharist, fulfilling the required condition for receiving the Holy Communion in a state of grace. And when we talk about the mortal sin and the venial sins, there are things that make a mortal sin what it is. The first is that it must be a grave matter. The act must be intrinsically evil and immoral for it to be mortal sin. For instance, the act of murder, the act of rape, the act of incest, perjury, adultery, abortion, idolatry, hatred, envy, sins against the faith, the sin of despair, and even those sins that cry out to God. Voluntary murder, sodomy, homosexuality, taking advantage of the poor, and denying our workers their wages. The second condition for a sin to be a mortal sin is that it must be committed with full knowledge. And what that means is that the person knows that what he or she is about to do is evil and still goes forth to plan and execute that action. Having a full knowledge of what I want to do, being evil, yet I choose to still commit that act. And the third condition for a sin to be a mortal sin is what we call deliberate consent. And what does that mean? having known that this sin is sin, having had a full knowledge, the person now freely chooses to commit that act. For instance, forcing someone to commit a sin. Mortal sin is a complete turn away from God, and it turns a sinner to embrace everything that is not in line with the law of God. And when we look at venial sins again, they are minor violations of the moral law, such as weed-beating traffic lights, obscene gesture to another driver while in traffic, an unharmful lie, cheating in a test or an examination, failure to pay our taxes, and even failure to declare the accurate profit made from a business. Venial sins only weakens the soul with sickness, but does not kill the grace of God within the heart of the sinner. Venial sins are not deadly to the life of grace, but like minor wounds, which when not treated can lead to graver things. If venial sins are left unattended to, they can lead to greater sins. For our scriptural reference, we can check the first letter of St. John, chapter 5, verses 16 and 17. We can check the Gospel of St. Luke, chapter 12, verses 47 to 48. And we can check the Gospel of St. John, chapter 19, verse 11. My dear brothers and sisters, do you have questions pertaining to the faith or even social issues you would like me to answer? Please send them here, and I will answer them for you.